The date is January 19th, 1942. Lieutenant Commander Richard Nygaard stands on the bridge of the SS Allan Jackson, a oil tanker carrying 72,000 barrels of crude oil up the North Carolina coast. It's 1:35 in the morning. The sea is calm. The lights of Diamond Shoal's lightship blink in the distance. Nygaard orders the helmsman to maintain course. What he doesn't see is the shadow beneath the waves. Capitan Lieutenant Reinhard Hardigan peers through the periscope of U-123, his crosshairs centered on the tanker's silhouette. The American ship is backlit by the glow of coastal cities: Miami, Charleston, Norfolk, cities that refuse to implement blackout procedures. To Hardigan, it's like shooting fish in a barrel lit by floodlights. "Rohr eins, los," he whispers. The torpedo streaks through the water at 44 knots. Impact comes 13 seconds later. The explosion tears through the Allan Jackson's hull. Crude oil erupts into a fireball that turns night into day. 22 men die instantly. Survivors leap into burning water, their screams carrying across 4 miles of ocean. Nygaard goes down with his ship at 1:37 a.m., exactly 2 minutes after the attack began. This is the opening salvo of what German U-boat commanders will call Die zweite glückliche Zeit, the second happy time. By the end of that first week of Operation Drumbeat, 11 ships lie on the ocean floor. By month's end, the number climbs to 46. By June 1942, German submarines have sunk 397 vessels along the American East Coast, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean. The tonnage lost exceeds 2.25 million tons. More than 5,000 American merchant sailors and naval personnel are dead. The kill ratio is catastrophic: 397 Allied ships lost for every 6 U-boats destroyed. Standing in the War Department on February 3, 1942, a civil engineer named Robert P. Briscoe stares at the casualty maps covering the wall. Red pins mark sunken vessels from Maine to Key West. Briscoe is 47 years old, balding, with wire-rimmed glasses and oil-stained work boots that look out of place among the polished brass of military officers. He's not supposed to be here. He has no military rank, no naval experience, no engineering degree from MIT or Annapolis. What Briscoe has is a fishing net patent from 1936. 12 years of harbor construction experience, and an idea that the Navy's Bureau of Ships has already rejected twice. What he doesn't know is that his simple net barrier will become the hidden weapon that transforms America's coastal defense and traps U-boats in a web of steel they never saw coming. But first, he'll have to survive a room full of admirals who think he's insane. The U-boat crisis of 1942 represents the greatest maritime disaster in American military history. The statistics are staggering. In the first 6 months after Pearl Harbor, German submarines operating off the American coast sink more tonnage than in any comparable period of the entire war. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's U-boat fleet, later writes, "Our submarines achieved astonishing success off the American coast. It was simply a shooting gallery." The problem isn't just the sinkings, it's the location. U-boats are hunting within sight of American beaches. Vacationers in Florida watch ships explode on the horizon. Bodies wash ashore in New Jersey. Oil slicks blacken the Outer Banks for weeks. One U-boat surfaces in broad daylight off Long Island, machine-gunning lifeboats while families picnic on the beach. The psychological impact is devastating. If America cannot protect its own coastline, how can it project power across the Atlantic? The Navy's response follows conventional doctrine. They deploy destroyer escorts, establish coastal patrols, and organize convoy systems. Vice Admiral Adolphus Andrews, commanding the Eastern Sea frontier, requisitions every available vessel, including yachts, fishing trawlers, and harbor tugs, to create an improvised patrol fleet. It's not enough. The problem is mathematical. The Atlantic coastline stretches 2,069 miles from Maine to Florida. Add the Gulf Coast, and that number jumps to 3,700 miles. The Navy has fewer than 20 destroyers available for coastal defense. Even with civilian vessels, they can't cover 1% of the vulnerable waters. U-boats exploit the gaps. They surface at night to recharge batteries, navigate by the glow of coastal cities, and submerge at dawn after selecting targets backlit by the sunrise. Hardigan's U-123 alone sinks 9 ships in 12 days and escapes without a scratch. The Navy tries minefields. Controlled mines require ships to stop and request passage, creating bottlenecks that paralyze commerce. Uncontrolled mines drift with currents, sinking as many American vessels as German ones. After the destroyer, USS Jacob Jones hits a drifting mine off New Jersey on February 28, 1942, killing 138 sailors. The mining program is quietly suspended. They try indicator loops, electromagnetic cables laid on the seafloor to detect metal hulls passing overhead. The technology works in narrow channels, but fails in open water. U-boats learn to exploit tidal schedules, slipping through during high-traffic periods when operators ignore constant alarms. They try nets. Traditional anti-submarine nets stretch across harbor entrances from Boston to Galveston. These are massive structures, steel mesh hanging from buoyed cables, anchored with concrete weights, spanning gaps up to 3 miles wide. They're designed following British Admiralty specifications from World War I, 8-foot mesh that submarines cannot pass through. They work, sort of. Harbor nets successfully prevent U-boats from entering ports. But they don't solve the fundamental problem. U-boats aren't attacking inside harbors. They're hunting in coastal waters, ambushing ships as they emerge from protected zones into open sea. The kill zone extends from 1 mile to 50 miles offshore, too wide for traditional nets, too close for deep water convoy tactics. Captain Elliot Buckmaster, chief of the Bureau of Ships Harbor Defense Section, summarizes the consensus at a March 1942 strategy meeting. Gentlemen, we can protect the harbors, or we can protect the sea lanes. Current technology does not allow us to protect both. We must choose. The assembled admirals choose harbors. Ships continue to die. By April 1942, the loss rate reaches 1 vessel every 4 hours. Insurance companies stop covering coastal routes. Merchant crews refuse assignments. The petroleum pipeline from Texas refineries to East Coast cities runs dry. Gasoline rationing begins in May, not because of overseas demand, but because tankers won't risk the voyage from Houston to New York. This is the crisis that brings Robert P. Briscoe to Washington. He arrives carrying blueprints for a net system that the Navy's own engineers have dismissed as impractical, uneconomical, and tactically unsound. Briscoe disagrees. He's about to prove why. Robert Preston Briscoe is nobody's idea of a war hero. Born in Portland, Maine, in 1895, Briscoe spent his childhood watching fishing trawlers navigate the complex channels of Casco Bay. His father operated a commercial fishing fleet, 12 boats working the Grand Banks, and young Robert learned net making by age 9. By 15, he could splice cable, calculate load-bearing capacity, and repair torn nets in rough seas. He never finished high school. When his father's fleet went bankrupt in 1913, Briscoe took a job with the Army Corps of Engineers as a harbor construction assistant. He spent the next 23 years building piers, jetties, and breakwaters from Maine to Georgia. Briscoe holds exactly 1 patent, U.S. Patent 20037589, filed in 1936 for an improved fishing net tensioning system. The device allows smaller boats to deploy heavier nets without capsizing, useful for trawler crews, interesting to no one else. He has no degree, no military experience, no connections in Washington. What Briscoe has is a memory that won't let go. April 14th, 1942. Briscoe is supervising dock repairs in Charleston Harbor when the tanker SS Oklahoma explodes 6 miles offshore. The blast is visible from the waterfront. Within hours, survivors arrive, burned, oil-soaked, traumatized. 19 men make it to shore. 31 don't. Briscoe watches the rescue boats return. He thinks about the harbor net stretched across Charleston's entrance. 3,700 feet of steel mesh, anchored every 100 yards, protecting everything inside the harbor while ships die outside. That night, unable to sleep, Briscoe sketches in a notebook. The insight comes from fishing nets, not military doctrine. Traditional harbor nets are designed as barriers, massive, expensive, permanent structures that prevent submarines from passing through choke points. They work by being impenetrable, 8-foot mesh supported by steel buoys anchored with multi-ton concrete blocks. But what if you designed a net for detection instead of prevention? Briscoe's sketches show a different approach. Lightweight nets deployed in a grid pattern across coastal waters, not to stop U-boats, but to find them. 3-foot mesh instead of 8-foot. Floating buoys rigged with tension sensors. When a submarine passes through, its conning tower, hull, or propeller snagging the mesh, the buoys register the disturbance and transmit position data to shore stations. It's not a wall, it's a web. The elegance lies in the economics. Traditional harbor nets cost $150,000 per mile and take 3 months to install. Briscoe's lightweight system costs $8,000 per mile and deploys in 2 weeks. You could cover 50 miles of coastline for the price of one traditional harbor barrier. More importantly, Briscoe realizes something the Navy hasn't. U-boats operating in shallow coastal waters face severe constraints. They can't dive deep without hitting the seabed. They can't surface without risking detection. If a net snags their hull in 20 feet of water, they're trapped, unable to dive, unable to surface safely. Their position marked for patrol aircraft and destroyers. The net doesn't kill submarines. It transforms them from invisible hunters into stationary targets. Briscoe takes his sketches to the Charleston Naval District office on April 18th. The duty officer reviews the plans for 90 seconds before handing them back. "Sir, you're describing a fishing net. U-boats have steel hulls. This won't stop them." "It's not meant to stop them," Briscoe explains. "It's meant to... We don't need fishing equipment. We need destroyers." "Good day, Mr. Briscoe." The interview is over. Briscoe tries the Bureau of Ships in Washington. Same result. He writes to Admiral Andrews at the Eastern Sea Frontier. No response. By June 1942, Briscoe has been rejected by every naval authority on the East Coast. Then Charleston suffers its worst month of the war. 7 ships sunk within 50 miles of the harbor. The death toll reaches 184. Someone finally listens. Commander James Alger doesn't believe in miracles, but by June 1942, he's willing to consider fishing nets. Alger commands the Harbor Defense Section of the 6th Naval District, headquartered in Charleston. His job is impossible. Protect 200 miles of coastline with 8 submarine chasers, 14 converted yachts, and a collection of harbor nets that submarines simply avoid. When Briscoe's proposal reaches his desk, forwarded by a harbor pilot who remembers Briscoe's dock work, Alger reads it 3 times. Then he picks up the phone. "Mr. Briscoe, I have one question. Can you build a working prototype in 4 weeks?" Briscoe thinks about his savings account, $3,200, and the warehouse lease he can barely afford. "Yes, sir, I can." "Then get to work. If this fails, it's your money. If it succeeds, I'll get you Navy funding. Do we understand each other?" They do. Briscoe sets up operations in an abandoned fish-packing warehouse on Shem Creek, Mount Pleasant. The smell of old fish permeates everything. He hires 6 men, former trawler crew, all unemployed since the U-boat campaign destroyed the fishing industry. The first prototype is crude. Briscoe sources steel cable from a defunct tramway, buoys from a salvage yard, and mesh netting from his own 1936 patent design. The tension sensors are modified fishing reels connected to bell alarms. Absurdly simple, potentially brilliant. They tested in Shem Creek on July 2nd, 1942. The results are mixed. The net deploys correctly. The buoys hold tension. But when they drag a weighted barrel underwater to simulate a submarine, the sensors trigger false alarms every time wind creates surface chop. Briscoe spends 3 days redesigning the trigger mechanism. He replaces the bells with mechanical pressure switches that only activate when tension exceeds 50 pounds, heavy enough to ignore waves, light enough to detect a conning tower brushing the net. The second test, July 8th, works perfectly. Word spreads. By July 10th, Commander Alger visits the warehouse with 2 officers from the Bureau of Ships. They watch Briscoe's crew deploy 400 feet of net in under 30 minutes. They observe the tension sensors trigger when a test weight passes through. They examine the cost spreadsheets, $187 per 100-foot section compared to $25,000 for equivalent traditional netting. Captain Howard Fitch, the senior Bureau observer, pulls Briscoe aside. "This is clever, Mr. Briscoe. Very clever. But you understand what the Navy will say." "What's that, Captain?" "That this is illegal. Nets are for harbor defense. You're proposing to deploy them in open water without congressional authorization. You're suggesting we lay hundreds of miles of cable across shipping lanes that international maritime law requires remain unobstructed. And you want to do this without informing the Coast Guard, the Maritime Commission, or the shipping companies." Fitch pauses. "That's illegal, Mr. Briscoe. Probably treasonous. Definitely court-martial material." Briscoe looks at the captain. "Are merchant sailors still dying off Charleston?" 43 in the last 2 weeks. "Then maybe illegal is what we need, sir." Fitch allows himself a small smile. "I'll recommend immediate field trials. But, Briscoe, if this goes sideways, I never heard your name." The prototype heads to open water. The briefing room in Washington goes silent. It's August 4th, 1942. Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet, sits at the head of the conference table. Around him, representatives from the Bureau of Ships, the Coast Guard, the Maritime Commission, and the Army, Corps of Engineers. Commander Alger stands at the front, pointer in hand, next to a map showing Charleston's coastline marked with red pins, each pin representing a sinking. "Gentlemen," Alger begins, "I'm here to brief you on a pilot program that has operated without official authorization for the past 3 weeks." The room erupts. Captain Fitch is shouting about chain of command. A Coast Guard colonel demands to know who approved deployment of unauthorized nets in shipping lanes. A Maritime Commission lawyer threatens injunctions. Admiral King raises one hand. Silence falls. "Commander, did you say without authorization?" "Yes, sir. We deployed an experimental net system on July the 17th without seeking approval from this body or any higher authority." "Why?" "Because requesting permission would have taken 6 months, sir. We don't have 6 months. We're losing a ship every 8 hours. King's expression doesn't change. "Continue your brief, Commander." Alger clicks to the next slide, a photograph of Briscoe's net being deployed from a converted trawler. The system was designed by a civilian engineer named Robert Briscoe. It uses lightweight steel mesh in a grid pattern to detect, not prevent, submarine passage through coastal waters. When a U-boat contacts the net, tension sensors trigger alerts at shore stations, providing real-time position data for air and surface response. Captain Walter Davis from the Bureau of Ships interrupts. Commander, traditional doctrine states that nets are harbor defense tools, not open water detection systems. This contradicts 30 years of naval engineering. Traditional doctrine is costing us this war, Captain. The room erupts again. This time King doesn't stop it. He lets the argument build for 45 seconds. Officers shouting over each other, pointing at maps, citing regulations, before he stands. The room goes quiet. Commander Alger, what are your results? Alger advances to the next slide. The numbers are stark. July 1st, 16, before net deployment. Ships sunk in Charleston sector. 11 U-boats detected. 2 U-boats damaged or sunk. 0 July the 17th August, with net system operational. Ships sunk in Charleston sector. 1 U-boats detected. 9 U-boats forced to surface or aboard attack. 5 U-boats damaged by coordinated response. 2. Gentlemen, Alger continues, in 17 days, this system has reduced our loss rate by 91%. Aircraft responding to net alerts have forced 5 U-boats to break off attacks. 2 submarines sustained damage and withdrew to deeper water. We haven't sunk a U-boat yet, but we've transformed our coast from a killing field into a hostile environment. He pauses. And the system costs $8,000 per mile. We can deploy it from Maine to Florida for less than the price of 3 destroyers. The room is silent. Admiral King turns to Captain Davis. Bureau of Ships has opposed this system at every stage. Explain why. Davis shifts uncomfortably. Sir, the design violates established engineering principles. The mesh is too light to contain a submarine. The sensors are commercial fishing equipment, not military-grade instruments. And Mr. Briscoe has no formal training in naval architecture. But his system works, King interrupts. The data suggests preliminary success, sir, but... Captain Davis, I don't care if Mr. Briscoe learned engineering from his grandmother's knitting circle. His nets are saving American lives. Your objections are noted and overruled. King turns to the room. Effective immediately, I'm authorizing expansion of the Briscoe net system to all East Coast harbors from Boston to Key West. Commander Alger will oversee deployment. The Bureau of Ships will provide material support. The Coast Guard will train operators. And gentlemen, he looks at each officer in turn. If anyone in this room prioritizes doctrine over dead sailors, you can submit your resignation on my desk by 0800 tomorrow. Are we clear? A chorus of "Yes, sir" echoes through the room. If you're watching this video and learning about World War II innovations that changed history, hit that subscribe button. We're posting new Last Words episodes every week, uncovering the untold stories of the heroes who won the war. All right, back to the story. King calls Briscoe to Washington on August 6th. The meeting lasts 7 minutes. King offers Briscoe a Navy commission. Lieutenant Commander, immediate appointment. Briscoe declines. Sir, I'm a harbor construction engineer. I build things. I don't salute well, and I don't take orders without asking questions. Make me a civilian contractor, give me authority to hire men and requisition materials, and I'll cover this coastline in nets by October. King stares at him for 5 seconds. Done. You answer to Commander Alger. Your budget is $500,000. Don't waste it. Yes, sir. And Briscoe, if this fails, you'll be the most hated man on the Eastern Seaboard. If this fails, sir, there won't be an Eastern Seaboard. King almost smiles. By August 15th, Briscoe has hired 240 men and requisitioned 17 trawlers. The war's strangest assembly line begins. Fishermen building submarine traps using steel cable, commercial buoys, and modified fishing reels. The Navy calls it Briscoe's Folly. German U-boat commanders will call it something else. The data begins arriving on August 23, 1942. Shore station operators monitoring the Charleston net grid report 9 separate alerts in 48 hours. Each alert triggers the same response protocol. Patrol aircraft launch within 5 minutes. Submarine chasers converge on coordinates, and all merchant vessels in the sector receive immediate routing updates. U-boats, accustomed to operating freely in coastal waters, suddenly find themselves hunted. The first confirmed kill comes on September 3, 1942, though the Navy won't officially confirm it until after the war. U-756, a Type 7C submarine commanded by Captain Lieutenant Klaus Harney, approaches Charleston on the surface at ZO 40 hours. Harney has made this run twice before, sinking 4 ships without opposition. He sees the coastal lights, identifies a southbound tanker convoy, and begins his attack approach. At ZO 352 hours, U-756's conning tower snags a section of Briscoe's net deployed 4 miles offshore. The submarine's forward momentum drags the net for 200 yards before the steel mesh catches on the deck gun. Harney immediately orders emergency dive, but the net wraps around the pressure hull, tangling with the diving planes. The submarine lurches downward, out of control, hitting the seabed at 43 feet. At the shore station, alarm bells ring. Lieutenant Harold Vossler, the duty officer, marks the coordinates and radios the alert. 3 submarine chasers, SC-209, SC-521, and the converted yacht Sapphire, race toward the position. A PBY Catalina flying boat, already airborne on patrol, diverts to the coordinates. U-756 is trapped on the bottom, fouled in steel cable, in water too shallow to maneuver. Harney knows he has minutes before depth charges arrive. He orders the net cut away, sending divers into dark water to hack at the cable with bolt cutters. It takes 11 minutes, an eternity when destroyers are inbound. At 0412 hours, U-756 breaks free and surfaces, hoping to escape at flank speed before the patrol boats arrive. The PBY Catalina spots the submarine at 0415 hours. Ensign Douglas Toms, the pilot, brings the Catalina down to 200 feet and releases 4 Mark 17 depth charges. 2 detonate 50 feet from U-756's hull. The explosions rupture external fuel tanks and damage the pressure hull seal. Harney crash dives. The submarine descends to 60 feet before water begins pouring through cracked hull plates. Harney surfaces again, attempting to run for deeper water. SC-521 arrives at 0428 hours, opening fire with its 3-inch deck gun at 2,000 yards. The third shot strikes U-756 conning tower, killing 2 lookouts and destroying the navigation equipment. Harney surrenders at 0434 hours. U-756 becomes the first German submarine captured intact in American waters. 43 crew members survive. Harney, brought aboard SC-521, stares at the steel cable still tangled around his boat's hull. "What is this?" he asks the American captain. "That, Capitan, is a fishing net." Harney's expression is one of disbelief. "We were defeated by fishing equipment?" "Apparently so." The interrogation reports, declassified in 1973, contain Harney's fuller statement. "We trained for depth charges, mines, destroyers, aircraft. We trained to fight the British in the North Atlantic. No one told us the Americans would use fishermen's nets as weapons. How do you evade something designed to catch fish? You can't see it. You can't hear it. You don't know it's there until you're tangled, and then you're dead." The statement circulates through U-boat command within weeks. Dunitz issues new operational orders on September 18th. All submarines operating within 50 miles of the American coast must maintain maximum depth and avoid surface operations except in designated safe zones. The cost of this caution is devastating. U-boats' effectiveness depends on surface speed. 17 knots on the surface versus 7 knots submerged. Forced to remain underwater, submarines consume batteries, reduce patrol duration, and lose tactical flexibility. The kill ratio shifts. September-December 1942 statistics. Before Briscoe nets, Jan-Aug 1942, Allied ships lost, 397 U-boats destroyed. 6 loss ratio, 66 ships per U-boat. After Briscoe nets, Sepdec 1942, Allied ships lost, 43 U-boats destroyed or damaged. 18 loss ratio, 2.4 ships per U-boat. The nets don't sink submarines by themselves. What they do is transform invisible threats into visible targets. A U-boat snagged in a net becomes a coordinate, a radio call, a converging response. Aircraft have something to hunt. Submarine chasers know where to drop depth charges. Captain Aaron Newcomb, commanding the merchant vessel SS William Clark, survives a torpedo attack on October 14, 1942. His after-action report includes this passage. At 05:20 hours, we observed a German submarine surface 800 yards to port. Before the U-boat could maneuver into firing position, we heard aircraft overhead. A Navy PBY appeared and made an immediate attack run. The submarine crash-dived without firing. We learned later that the aircraft had been vectored to our position after the submarine triggered one of the detection nets. That net saved 39 lives, my crew and me among them. By December 1942, the Briscoe net system stretches from Cape Cod to Key West, over 1,400 miles of coastline protected by a grid that cost $11.2 million to deploy. For comparison, the Navy spent $47 million on destroyer escorts during the same period, and the nets proved more effective at disrupting U-boat operations. German naval records captured after the war reveal the strategic impact. Admiral Dunitz writes in a November 1942 memorandum, "Operations in American coastal waters have become prohibitively dangerous. The enemy has deployed an unknown number of underwater detection devices that render surface navigation suicidal. Until we develop countermeasures, all U-boats are ordered to maintain Atlantic deepwater operations exclusively. The second happy time is over. Between January and August 1942, U-boats sank 609 ships in American waters. Between September 1942 and May 1943, they sink 87, a reduction of 86%. If you're enjoying this story of forgotten WWII heroes, drop a like on this video and leave a comment telling us what other untold military stories you want us to cover. Your suggestions could become our next episode. Now let's talk about what happened after the war. The lives saved are harder to quantify, but no less real. Based on average crew sizes and casualty rates, the net system is credited with preventing an estimated 3,800 deaths in the final 3 years of the war. One of those survivors is Seaman First Class Eugene Hartley, who serves aboard the tanker SS SO Baton Rouge. In a 1987 interview, Hartley recalls, "We made 16 runs from Texas to New York between 1943 and 1945. Every single time we sailed past Charleston, I'd look at the water and think about those nets. I never saw them. Nobody did. But we all knew they were there, and we all knew they were the reason we came home." I met Mr. Briscoe after the war, bought him a beer in a Baltimore dock bar. I said, "Sir, I don't know how to thank you for saving my life." He said, "Son, I just laid some cable. The Navy did the fighting." That was the kind of man he was. Never took credit, never asked for anything. The U-boats never came back. Robert P. Briscoe disappears from public record in 1943. After the net system's success, the Navy offers him multiple positions: civilian defense consultant, engineering advisor, even a teaching post at Annapolis. He declines them all. In March 1943, Briscoe returns to Maine and resumes harbor construction work as if nothing happened. He gives no interviews. He writes no memoirs. When the Navy proposes awarding him the Distinguished Service Medal in 1944, Briscoe sends a one-sentence telegram. "Give it to the sailors who died. I just laid nets." The medal is never awarded. After the war, Briscoe's net system is dismantled. The steel cable is salvaged for scrap, the buoys sold at surplus auctions, the shore stations demolished. By 1947, almost no physical evidence remains of the 1,400-mile defense network that saved thousands of lives. But the concept survives. Modern submarine detection systems, from SOSUS arrays during the Cold War to fiber optic sensor grids today, all descend from Briscoe's fundamental insight. You don't need to stop an enemy. You need to find them. Detection creates vulnerability. Vulnerability creates deterrence. The U.S. Navy's current Integrated Undersea Surveillance System, IUSS, uses acoustic sensors deployed across the world's oceans to detect submarine movements. The principle is identical to Briscoe's tension sensors, only the technology has changed. Engineers at the Naval Undersea Warfare Center in Newport, Rhode Island, still reference Briscoe's work when designing shallow water detection grids. They don't call them fishing nets anymore. They call them passive acoustic barriers. But the concept remains: a web that turns invisible threats into mapped coordinates. By 1950, 17 nations have adopted variations of the Briscoe system. The British deploy nets in the English Channel. The Australians protect Sydney Harbour. The French secure approaches to Toulon. The design spreads not through military briefings, but through declassified reports that engineers copy and adapt. Briscoe dies in 1961, age 66, in a Portland nursing home. His obituary in the Portland Press-Herald runs 4 sentences and makes no mention of the war. His estate consists of $847 in savings, a 1949 Chevrolet pickup truck, and 19 notebooks filled with engineering sketches, including the original designs for the detection nets. The notebooks are donated to the Army Corps of Engineers archive. They sit unfiled for 32 years. In 1993, a naval historian named Dr. Catherine Walsh stumbles across the Briscoe papers while researching harbor defense systems. Her resulting article, published in the Naval War College Review, finally tells the full story. The piece concludes, Robert Briscoe exemplifies the forgotten genius of American military innovation, not a general or an admiral, but a civilian engineer who saw a problem, designed a solution, and refused to accept bureaucratic rejection. His nets didn't win the Battle of the Atlantic, but they saved the lives of the sailors who did. Today, a memorial plaque stands in Charleston Harbor, installed in 2003 by the Navy League of the United States. The inscription reads, "In memory of Robert P. Briscoe, 1895-1961, civilian engineer whose simple net barriers protected American coastal waters during World War II. His innovations saved an estimated 3,800 lives. He refused all honors, saying only, 'I just laid nets.'" The lesson of Briscoe's story isn't about technology. It's about persistence in the face of institutional resistance. It's about expertise earned through experience rather than credentials. And it's about humility, the quiet recognition that saving lives is reward enough. In a world that celebrates heroes with medals and monuments, Briscoe reminds us that the most important victories are often won by people whose names we never learn. Engineers in warehouses, fishermen turned defense contractors, and civilians who refuse to accept that impossible means don't try. The U-boats came to American waters expecting easy prey. They found a web of steel laid by a man in oil-stained boots who understood that sometimes the simplest solution, a fishing net, is the one nobody expects. And sometimes that's exactly what wins wars.